So, is everybody here? Everybody in the room?
Yeah, the Rockwells is still the big Rockwells, the family Rockwell, no?
Okay, yeah. So first of all, I'd like to thank you all for coming today. I like to do the waffles and gravy is my way of telling you guys that I love you guys. I'm really excited because my parents are in town. They're going on a cruise. They leave next weekend. They're going with my niece, who's roaming around, Nicole. So my brothers who live in LA decided to come and join us for the weekend, so we're all together and we're having a ton of fun and a lot of laughs. And this kind of came up impromptu because, as you'll hear soon, my dad was one of a group of folks that went down to Monteverde, down to Costa Rica, and founded a place called Monteverde. And he's one of the last of his kind. He's 95. He's going to be 96 in November, and we're blessed to still have him with us. So he tells this story with my mom to groups of folks that come to visit Monteverde. And they really enjoy it because they're hearing it firsthand from somebody who was there, who lived it, who had to deal with it. And then the perspective that my mom brings, and the business and the family and the life that they built together. So this is their story. I hope you enjoy it. Go ahead.
Well, thank you. I usually start by telling why there's a Monteverde. When the United States passed their Universal Military Training Act of 1948, 4 of us in the Fairhope, Alabama Friends meeting, Quaker meeting, refused to register for that draft law. So we were arrested and sentenced to a year and a day in prison. And we were actually in prison for a third of the sentence and out on parole the balance. So after we were released from prison, we and others in the meeting got to talking about it, decided maybe we ought to leave the United States, see if we can find someplace a little less militaristic. So we considered various places we might move to. We thought about Canada, but southern Alabama, don't think we want to go up where it's so cold. And Australia, New Zealand, too far away. Couldn't get back to visit friends and relatives. So we thought, maybe there's something in Central America. So one couple of the group that was interested in moving came with a tour visiting all the countries of Central America. And they returned and said, Costa Rica is much better than any of the other Central American countries. More stable government, better economy, the rich are not as rich and the poor are not as poor. And they abolished their army in 1948. So we decided that Costa Rica would be our destination. So 7 families of us in Fairhope, Alabama, sold our positions there and came to Costa Rica. Most of the group flew down and shipped their goods by ship. And this is the largest plane that could land in Costa Rica in 1950. So those that flew down, most of them flew in 4-motor planes to Guatemala City and changed into smaller planes to go into San Jose. This is a bus in San Jose in 1950. A little different from what it used now. So we got to our prison sentences terminated on October 27th. And we started for Costa Rica on November 4th. So the government had nothing against us. We got to the Costa Rican, to the U.S.-Mexican border, and the U.S. customs officials asked me for the export license for the Jeep I was driving. Export license? I didn't have one. So I sat in Laredo, Texas, while I applied to Washington for an export license, which took about 10 days. And then we headed on down. Went to Mexico City to get transit visas for Guatemala and El Salvador. This is one of our camps in Mexico. I think this picture was taken close to Oaxaca, Mexico. And so we found that Mexico had their part of the Pan American Highway built to the Guatemala border, but Guatemala didn't have any road connecting with it. Well, Guatemala had a road to the border at Tapachula, down near the Pacific coast. Mexico didn't have a road connecting with it. All they had was a railroad. So finally we had to put the vehicles on flat cars and go on this rickety narrow gauge railroad for 200 miles. Unfortunately, I don't have a picture of the vehicles on the flat cars, but this is the locomotive that pulled the train. So we got into Guatemala. Roads were not very good, but passable. And the Pan American Highway across El Salvador was all paved. And across the corner of Honduras, good gravel road, no problem. Then we crossed into Nicaragua, arrived at the customs station at the border, and they wanted us to unload everything out of the truck and trailer to inspect. We really didn't want to do that. Well, they said the only alternative would be to have a letter from the American ambassador giving them permission to seal the vehicles and let us take them to Managua to be inspected. So we sent a telegram to the American ambassador. Next morning we had a telegram back telling the guards to let us go. So we drove into Managua, went to the customs house, and ushered into the general's office, the head of customs, and said, very shortly after we got there, he said, "Are you Quakers?" And we said, "We were Quakers." He said, if there was anything he could do to help us, just let him know. Sent us on our way, never even looked at the vehicles. So then we came on down to the Nicaragua, Costa Rica border. Again, the road ended. So we went back to San Juan del Sur, port on the Pacific coast of Nicaragua, to see whether we could put the vehicles on ship and ship them from there to Punta Arenas. But it turned out to be impossible. So finally, my sister's family, all but the two older boys, which were two of the four of us that were in prison, flew from Managua to San Jose. And my two nephews and a cousin that was coming down with us and I then came back to the border and started making our way through. And it took us 1 month to travel 12 miles. In the mud. It was just the 1st of January, 1951, when we crossed the border, and we drove a couple hundred yards, and the truck got stuck in the mud. So we spent several hours to get it out of the mud. So we said, well, maybe we better camp by the river here for a few days to give it a little more chance to dry out before we try to go any further. So we pulled over next to the river, went down, went swimming. When we came up from going swimming, a man said, "You better not swim in that river. There's sharks in the river." Sharks in the river? We thought we must have misunderstood him. Next morning we went down to go swimming. Saw this fin going up the river and back down. Yes, there are sharks in that river. Turns out that about 10 miles down from where we camped, the river empties into Lake Nicaragua. And Lake Nicaragua is the only place in the world where there are freshwater sharks. They're bull sharks. Apparently they came up the San Juan River from the Caribbean, became acclimatized to the fresh water and stayed. So we didn't swim anymore. On that 12-mile stretch, there were a couple of places that we drove through pastures. One place we cut down trees and made sort of a corduroy road across a swampy place. Another place we drove up a creek bed a little ways. Another place we built a little bridge over a gully. But we finally got across. Arrived in La Cruz, Costa Rica on February 1st, 1951. So our passports say, leaving Nicaragua, January 1st, 1951. Arriving Costa Rica, February 1st, 1951. Apparently we weren't anywhere for a month. Took us 4 more days to get to San Jose. So we arrived in San Jose on February 4th, 1951. Exactly 3 months from the day we left Fairhope. This is the 4 of us that made the whole trip by land. I'm on the left and my cousin next to me and my 2 nephews on the right. As the group was moving down, we rented houses or apartments in or near San Jose while we were looking for land. We had asked the Costa Rican government for residence visas before we left the United States and told them that we wanted to come and farm. So they had given us residence visas before we left the United States. So we were looking for farmland. And we soon found that we wanted to be in high elevation, to be above the zone of the mosquitoes that carry malaria and yellow fever. And also, if the temperature's a little bit cool, you feel more like doing something. So we were looking for highland, and we soon found that the land in the Central Valley near San Jose was too expensive. We couldn't afford to buy there. So it limited the area pretty much where we could locate. There was a man, Andre Sali, had a coffee beneficio in San Francisco de Heredia, and he also had a piece of property at Cañas Gordas, down close to the Panamanian border, which he thought we might be interested in. So he let a couple of our families camp on the patios of the coffee beneficio, and we had the use of the house there. So on Sundays, we would have our meetings for worship and potluck dinner together and talk over the places that we'd seen during the week. The man in the center of the picture there is my father. My father and mother were among the original group that came down. My father was 72 and my mother 65 when they sold their possessions in Alabama and came to Costa Rica. And both of them lived to the age of 95 in Monteverde. So this Andre Sali had a piece of property at Cañas Gordas, close to the Panamanian border, that he thought we might be interested in. But to get there in 1951, you had to fly from San Jose to Golfito because there was no road, go by Banana Company Railroad to Vienna, by jeep up in the mountains, and horseback to the land through the mud. And when we got to the land, we found there were deep ravines in it. And the problem of getting anything to market with no road to the central part of the country, we decided that's not the place for us. So we didn't buy there. Man came to us, said he had a piece of property he wanted to sell us. So a couple of us went to see what he had to offer. It was a place called La Suiza, south from San Jose, and good elevation on the Atlantic side of the ridge, but good elevation. And he kept explaining, muy plano, very level. All the time we were hanging onto the trees to keep from falling down the ravines. No, that's not what we want. Another place we were shown was in the San Carlos region, but that's lowland. Finally, a man came to us and said he had a piece of property he wanted to sell us. So 2 of the group went with him to see what he had to offer. Turned out to be an hacienda down in Guanacaste, lowlands. We told him, we're not interested in lowlands. Well, he had flown between Guanacaste and San Jose and had seen this sort of a shelf on the side of the mountain here. So he investigated, found that the title of the land was owned by the Guatemala Land Company. That came about because about 1900, a group of men wanted to build a hydroelectric plant in Guatemala to furnish electricity for the gold mines of Avangardes and the town of Punta Arenas. So the government, to give them help, gave them title to all of the watershed of the Guatemala River, which is a tremendous area. But Costa Ricans had come in and cleared land and established farms and had possession rights, squatters' rights. So this man went to the Guatemala Land Company, got an option for a piece of land and, up on the mountain, and came up and got options in some of the larger squatters' holdings. Then he came to us again. Brought 3 of the group by jeep to Guatemala and by horseback from Guatemala. That's a distance of about 12 miles. And that was on April 19th, 1951. So they came back and reported to the group what they found up here. We decided this is the place for us. So we made a deal for a tract of land of about 3,400 acres and set aside about a third of it at the headwaters of our little river to be left in forest as a watershed, and divided the balance into farms. Besides the 7 families from Fairhope, while we were looking for land, 4 more families joined us from other parts of the states. So there were 11 families, 44 persons that first founded Monteverde. So we got up there, and the road, it was just an ox cart trail. So we went to work with picks and shovels on the ox cart trail, brought the first jeeps up with help. And so then we started moving up. Some families moved into squatters' houses similar to this. Some families built platforms and put tents on to live in. And this is the tent that my parents and I lived in for 6 months when we first moved to Monteverde. And the road was so bad that we thought, well, maybe we ought to have an airstrip for transport, maybe just for communication, maybe just for transport. So we looked over the land that we purchased and decided on this strip of land. It's long enough and not too steep. It ought to do for an airstrip. So we cut the trees on it. And I started taking pilot's training in this Piper Super Cub. And after I had a few hours training, we came up to make an approach to the, quote, airstrip that still had the stumps on it, not intending to get close because it still had the stumps on it. So that's close enough. Gave it gas, losing elevation, more gas, losing elevation. So we went down and got out. Well, what's going on here? What happens is the prevailing winds come from the northeast. They hit the mountains and they go up and they come down. Mm-hmm. So they just push a plane into ground. So we decided, no airstrip for Monteverde. So we never cleared the stumps off of it. But just at that time, The geodetic survey was taking aerial photographs, mapping Costa Rica. And you look at one of those photographs, they've got an airstrip, you can measure it. So ever since, on the aeronautical maps of Costa Rica, it shows an airstrip in Monteverde, which never was. At least now it's marked as an abandoned airstrip. So we had a friend's school in Fairhope, Alabama, and among the group that came down was the school teacher. So she just kept on teaching school when she got to Costa Rica. So we've had a friend's school ever since we've been in Costa Rica. This year, I think there's about 120 students in our school from kindergarten through high school. It's totally bilingual. Both English and Spanish are taught as subjects. Some of the other subjects are taught in English. Some of the other subjects taught in Spanish. Totally bilingual. So some of our Costa Rican neighbors are sending their children to our school to become bilingual. And there's been, I think, 3 families at least from the United States that have moved to Monteverde for 2 or 3 or 4 years to send their children to our school. And so we got up there. So we got together to decide what we could produce for a cash income for the group. And 3 of the families had dairy farms in the States and liked dairying. Fluid milk was totally impossible. Couldn't get it to market. So we decided on cheese. And we bought 50 purebred Guernsey heifer calves from herds in the Central Valley of Costa Rica and brought them up a few at a time in the backs of the jeeps. And while they were growing, we organized the corporation Productores de Monteverde Sociedad Anónima. And this is a trademark. So when these calves grew up and ready to start producing milk, we built a little factory building, bought a second-hand wood-burning boiler to produce the steam to pasteurize the milk and keep it at the right temperature to develop the cheese, and a 200-gallon cheese vat made in Wisconsin. And that was one big job to get up the mountain. That's my father pouring his milk into the vat on the first day of production, the 8th of April, 1954. And for molds, we used Quaker Oats cans. And so the first week's production was about 250 pounds. The company now produces something over 8,000 pounds a day. Mm-hmm. So it has grown. Mm-hmm. This is the squatter's house on the land where the cheese factory is now. And it was one of the better houses on the land that we bought. So the first couple of years, we used it for our meeting for worship and our school. And in the shed in the background there, we had a sawmill run by water power, and which we kept going all daylight hours, sawing out lumber to build our houses with, and a little generator. So, yeah.
Yeah, little water. There you go.
Thanks, son.
You're welcome.
So, we had no electricity. Mm-hmm. And so for lights, we used candles and kerosene lamps, cooked on wood-burning stoves, everything by hand. Then in 1957, another couple came down and brought a 75 kilowatt generator. And he was a machinist. And he built a Pelton wheel and welded up his pipe and dug a ditch around the mountainside to get enough waterfall. And installed this nice little hydroelectric plant. So the whole community has had electricity since 1957. The local supplier, U.S.A, came into the area about 1980. So we were many years ahead of some of our neighbors. About 1968, a young man, George Powell, came to do research there for his doctorate in ornithology and became very interested in the ecosystems which he found on the upper edge of Monteverde. So he contacted World Wildlife Fund, Nature Conservancy, and Centro Científico Tropical, Costa Rican nonprofit organization, and received donations to purchase land adjoining our watershed. And it was, so the Monteverde Cloud Forest Reserve was started in 72, with an area of about 5,000 acres. With donations since, it's been enlarged to about 26,000 acres. And a few years later, a young woman, Sharon Kinsman, came to do research there. And when she left, she traveled around showing slides and giving lectures on the rainforest. Need a little lubrication here. She was giving her slides and lectures in a school in Sweden, and the children got excited about the need to save the rainforest. So they started doing work projects, and making things to sell and putting the money into a fund. Other schools in Sweden heard about it and started doing the same thing. And the Swedish government agreed to match whatever the children raised. Well, they sent a large sum of money to the Monteverde Cloud Forest Reserve, Monteverde Conservation League. So they bought a tract of land on the backside of the reserve, and they called it the Swedish Children's Rainforest. But almost immediately, they started receiving funds from children all over the world. So they bought more land and changed the name of all of their holdings to the Children's Eternal Rainforest. And they hold title to something over 90,000 acres, largest private reserve in Central America. And this is a map of the area. The blue on the upper left is Lake Arenal. The purple is Arenal Volcano National Park. The light green in the center is the Children's Eternal Rainforest. The dark green in the center is the Monteverde Cloud Forest Reserve. A little brown area just above it is the Santa Elena Cloud Forest Reserve, which is taken care of by the public high school in Santa Elena. And the dark green in the lower right is a reserve taken care of by the University of Costa Rica. So you can see there's a tremendous amount of land under protection now. But nearly all of it is on the Atlantic side of the ridge. So what the conservation organizations are working on now is trying to establish corridors into the lowlands on the Pacific side. And okay, gonna change gears. Questions?
Where's Monteverde though in that map?
The village is the little what is the red spot on the left of the Monteverde Cloud Forest Reserve. And the red spot up a little bit is the town of Santa Elena.
And where were you in this?
In a little red spot.
A little bit of-
More questions?
Yeah, how far is it from San Jose?
Um,
About 150 kilometers or something like that.
150 kilometers,
Probably.
something like
About
that.
150.
Takes about 2.5 hours to drive it now.
So how about in 1957?
Really,
2 days, huh?
Almost 100 miles.
Yeah. How old were you at the time?
Me? Well, I was 28 when we
first came. Yeah.
first went to to Costa Rica, and so
So it's about a 2.5 hour drive today. What was that drive back then in 1951?
Oh, sometimes 12 hours because we got stuck in the mud.
Yeah.
usually about 6 hours.
And how often
And-
did you go to San Jose from Monteverde? Did you?
Since I had medical training in the Army in the Second World War, I was called on by not only our friends community, but all our neighbors as well. So I sewed up innumerable cuts and injuries, put casts on broken arms, gave intravenous medication when required. I even did some of my own laboratory work. I had a microscope and a hand-cranked centrifuge and the dyes and so forth. So I was able to identify most of the pathogens that I had to treat.
Did you deliver any babies?
The Army didn't teach me that. A couple of the ladies of the group had taken a short course in midwifery before they moved down there. So I was just on hand in case they needed an injection of some kind.
Was that a couple hours too, that course?
How's that?
Was that a few hours, that course too, like the flying lessons?
So,
So, what? Okay, the Monteverde is special because it's a cloud rainforest. It's altitude, right?
yeah.
That's what. Well, what's the difference between a cloud rainforest and a regular rainforest at sea level?
Yeah, well, Monteverde is at an elevation of about 4,000 few hundred feet, and the Monteverde Children's Eternal Rainforest is a little bit lower, but still high elevation. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Well, it's totally different flora and fauna at a cloud rainforest than a regular rainforest. Everything is different in the cloud rainforest.
Yeah.
The animals, the birds,
Everything different.
is totally different and unique.
Right.
A higher elevation rainforest.
Right.
Which is what makes it so
Except
special.
some of the birds and animals and insects are elevationally migratory. So you also need to save some land in the lowlands as well. So for instance, the quetzal, I can't.
The quetzal bird.
Yeah, they spend part of the year in the medium elevation on the Pacific side, part of the year up in the highlands and in the Monteverde area, part of the year, down on the lower elevation on the Atlantic side of the ridge too. So you need some reserved area on both sides and on top.
Did you ever have an infrastructure of laws and rules and regulations, and were you ever the mayor of Monteverde?
So the question is if there were rules and regulations since you were so remote, and how did you govern the community, and if you were ever the mayor of Monteverde?
If
you were ever the mayor,
The boss.
the boss of Monteverde.
oh,
So maybe tell them, I mean, Monteverde inherited, or they brought with them an early American system of just town meetings and governing. Why don't you talk a little bit about the town meeting, how that worked?
that's when we first started Monteverde, we started having town meetings to make decisions on governing our community, and about 15 years after we went up there, they divided the district, and before that it was the Guatemala district of Guatemala, and they divided the district, left the bottom part Guatemala, named the new district Monteverde. And then, it's been about 15 years ago, I guess, they decreed a new municipality up there, named it Monteverde. So the name we gave our Friends community is now used for the whole area up.
You said French community?
Friends.
Friends.
That's what Quakers.
Okay.
Quakers call each other.
Friends.
About 6 years after we came, another family joined the community, and the wife of the family was a registered nurse. So she took over the treatment of the people in the area. When we first started the cheese factory, whoever was going to San Jose loaded up the cheese that was ready to sell, and took it to San Jose and peddled it out to some of the larger stores and stalls in the market. But as production increased, we found we had to have a full-time distributor. So after 8 years in Monteverde, I sold my farm, moved to San Jose, and contracted with the cheese company to develop to sell the cheese. And I bought this little English van, and it was the first vehicle to have the name Monteverde painted on it. And in 1970, I had a young man helping me, needed another vehicle. So I bought this international van from the local agency, but I took delivery at the factory in Ohio and drove it down. But by that time, there was a Pan American highway all the way, so it only took me 2 weeks. I had this vehicle had four-wheel drive, lock differential, and I put chains on it, winch, and one time I got it stuck so deep in a mud hole that I had to climb out the window. And I had to get a crawler tractor to come and pull it out of the mud. And one evening I went to the house of this young Costa Rican that was helping me distribute the cheese, and his mother was taking care of this little boy. And and at a year and a half, his teeth were decaying. So I found where the mother worked and went and talked to her and convinced her to give him to me to adopt. So I adopted this little year and a half old boy. And this is a picture of him about a year after I adopted him. And he's back there in the corner now.
That was the last good picture.
And a few years.
Yeah, but you tell him that you were single when you adopted.
Yeah, I was still single.
Yeah.
So I fixed a little bed behind the seat of the van I delivered cheese in. So he was just with me all the time. And a few years before that, a Quaker couple from La Jolla, California, bought a farm close to Monteverde. He was a horticulturalist, and he planted ornamental trees and plants to sell. When he had plants ready to sell, he rented a house behind the airport as a place to sell his plants. And I'm going to let somebody else tell from here on for a while.
It's my turn now. I better stand up. You like to hear a love story? How we met and everything?
Yes.
This couple that came from, well, first I was born in Alajuela, the city below the airport. And I was living with my parents. I was about 21 years old. And this elderly couple came and rented a house about 3 doors from our house. And I got acquainted with Mrs. Walmsley. They were an elderly couple. And she probably was about my age. I'm 77 now. In spite of the age, we had such a good, we got to be very good friends together. And she would play the piano, and I was singing hymns. And we had such a great time together. And one day, she hugged me and she said, "Flori, you're a good girl. You should marry a good man, but he has to be an American." She said, "Because the ticos are too macho." And she says, I'm going to look a man for you." And I thought, my goodness, at 21, I wasn't looking for a boyfriend and never for a husband at 21, but I always pray to the Lord. I always say, "Lord, please choose my husband. Don't let me fall in love with anybody if it is not that well." I always pray like that. And Mrs. Walmsley was very determined about it because 2 weeks after she told me that she was going to find a man for me, she came and knocked on the door. "Flori, I got the man for you." I thought, what? I was shocked. And so, of course, she started telling me all these good things about Marvin. You know, that he was like a doctor in Monteverde. And he did a great things, to the community and everything. So, but one thing that it touched my heart when she told me that he was adopting little Henry, because I thought it has to be a good man to do that because he was single and little Henry was in poor health. So that touched my heart. The problem was when I asked her, "How old is Marvin?" And she said, "Marvin? Probably 38, 39, something like that." I thought, my goodness, that's an old man for me. But she insisted. One of these Sundays, I'm going to invite Marvin over for a Sunday lunch, and you're going to come and meet him. So I thought, okay, that's fine. So that Sunday came, and I got there. I got to their house, and I looked at Marvin, and I felt good. I felt completely at peace. I never felt anything like that before. And and I always dreamed of a man tall and thin, and he was tall and thin. But I noticed that he was very, very nervous. He probably forgot all the Spanish he knew. And I didn't know any English back then. So we were just looking at each other and that was about it. And you know that little Henry was playing with blocks or something on the floor. And pretty soon he stood up and came and grabbed my skirt and called me Mommy.
I had an ambassador.
I think he trained him very well. Can you imagine? That's my heart melted down. The little fella needed a mom very desperately. So my heart was melted down with that. Well, anyway, so to make a story short, we were married. It was the will of God because we were married 5 months after we met. And there you are. So we were young and handsome. You know that when he asked me to marry him, he asked me in a very broken Spanish, but I got the message. And you know, us as a couple is what we call in Spanish, gato viejo, ratón tierno. Old cat, young mouse. And I tell people that he caught me like a mouse with cheese. So we were married on my 22nd birthday, and he was 40 years old. And but God had blessed us with a beautiful family, and we had been in love for 55 years. We celebrated our 55 years of marriage in last January. Yeah.
Wow.
So yeah. So he's going to tell you about the kids and everything about our family. Yeah.
So after we were married, Flory went through the procedure of adopting the little boy as well. And then we had 2 little sons born to us. And living in San Jose, and Flory not speaking hardly any English, the boys were not getting their English. So I decided to take the family back to the States for a few years to learn English with no accent. So I got a job selling chocolate in Midwest United States, and took the family to a little town just outside Indianapolis. And the reason we chose the town, because I had a niece who had grown up in Monteverde and knew Spanish and very well. So Flory would have somebody to help her out, because I drove in selling chocolate. My territory was from West Virginia and Ohio to Kansas and Nebraska, and from Kentucky and Missouri to the Canadian border. Now I drove 1,000 miles a week for 6 years. And so...
Yeah, that was very, very hard, because you can see that they were little. The kids were little. And the baby, Steven, was just 11 months old. So it was very, very hard. And then we moved to Indiana in the middle of November. And I didn't have any idea how cold it might get. So the first year was very, very rough, because I couldn't drive. I couldn't speak the language. And I was, he was on the road most of the time. And that was hard, but and thank God for his niece, because she grew up in Monteverde, so she was fluent in Spanish, and she was a lot of help to me. So thank God for her.
Christmas time of 1972, we came down to visit 1970. Christmas time of 1970, we came down to visit our families, and Flory wanted a daughter. But my family goes very heavily to boys. I had 1 sister and 4 brothers. One brother had 2 sons. Another brother had 2 sons. Another brother had 2 sons and 1 daughter. And we had 2 sons. So we adopted a little girl.
13 months old.
And
now we have girls in the family, because she gave us 2 granddaughters and a little great-granddaughter, 5 years old, Luciana. So we have girls in the family now.
So after 6 years in the States, the whole family learned English. So we moved back to Monteverde, and I worked a couple of years as production manager in the cheese factory. Then we built a little hotel, run it for 22 years, and sold it about 14 years ago. And
we named the hotel Flor Mar because Marvin and Flory. And back then it was very, very hard to have a business because there weren't any restaurants, so we had to feed the tourists 3 meals a day. That was hard. Sometimes we had up to 40, 45 people. That was hard.
so 5 years ago, our 4 children joined us to celebrate our 50th wedding anniversary. And one of them brought a grandson. And let's see what.
See, Henry and Stephen, they live in California. And Arthur is the one lives in Miami, of course.
And our daughter lives
in Costa
in
Rica.
Alajuela, close to the airport in Costa Rica. And this is our little great-granddaughter.
So what a blessing, what a big.
And this is what I did
family.
after I was 90. Zip line.
Any more questions?
That's the. Yeah. Questions? Well, thank you. Oh, yeah.
Why did you decide to go? You left. You said you were in Indiana for 6 years,
6 years.
Yeah.
and then why did you decide you went back to Monteverde?
Oh, when we first we moved up, so for the family to learn English, not to stay.
No.
No, I think when I took the job, I figured I'd go up for 5 years.
So it took.
Actually stayed
It took
6.
Mark for 6 years to learn English.
Still learning English. I'll talk pretty one day.
Are you still in Monteverde now?
Yeah,
Yeah, we live in Monteverde. Yeah.
yeah. My home is.
Different type of cheese now Monteverde produces.
When we started the cheese factory, we made a cheese similar to a Gouda. Now the company makes about 20 different kinds. Cheddar, smoked cheddar, sharp cheddar, Parmesan, baby Swiss, mozzarella, Manchego.
Yeah.
How big is the community, Monteverde, now? And is it still growing?
In the whole area now, there's probably about 8,000 people. Our Friends Meeting now has a membership of about 90, so it's doubled.
Any Costa Rican friends? Any Costa Ricans join?
Quakers?
Quakers?
A few,
A few.
not very many, but some, yes.
Dad, and how many of the original folks that moved to Monteverde that are all still alive and there?
There's still 5 of us, of the original 44. I'm the oldest, and the youngest was 1 year old when she came, but there's still 5 of the original 44 still living in Monteverde.
Who came up with the name?
Well, we considered various names, but settled on Monteverde because Green Mountain.
Is Monteverde Day is the day that you first got there, or what what is that date? What date is it?
The 19th of April was the first day that any of our groups saw the land up there. So we celebrate April 19th as Monteverde Day. And usually have picnic, lunch together and program of some kind.
Have your cheeses made it to the States?
No. The company can't export to the States because the United States requires that there be a company in the United States responsible for the product. So they have somebody to sue. And the company doesn't have
They do very well. They sell their entire production.
Oh, yeah.
They don't need
It's
export
huge in
markets.
Costa Rica.
No.
Yeah, they don't need export
They
markets.
don't need the export.
It's in every city.
But you can bring any amount back in your luggage. One trip back to the States, I had 40 pounds of cheese in my luggage. No problem.
The company has been sold, though, right?
Right.
Monteverde cheese has been sold. They sold the company.
Yes. It was sold about 3 years ago to a multinational. So we're no longer the owners of it. But it served its purpose. For many years, it was the primary source of income for the whole area up there. Because there's about 200 milk producers in the land up, most of them in the highlands, some in the lowlands as well, are sending the milk up to the factory. In the highlands, the breed of cattle that they're using are Holstein, Brown Swiss, and Jersey. In the lowlands, some of the producers are milking Brahma cattle and sending the milk up to the cheese factory.
And still all of it produced in, all of the cheeses produced in Monteverde, or you have they have other factories?
Are there other factories or just...
Oh, yes, there's other factories now.
Okay.
When we first started, there was one farm, primarily just a farm, in the highlands, not very far from San Jose, that was making a cheese similar to a Gouda. No, a cheddar, I mean. But it was the only aged cheese made in Costa Rica at the time when we started. Now there's several different companies making cheese in Costa Rica.
So, first of all, amazing story, amazing life. Thank you for sharing it. And it looks like at 90 you basically were doing zip lining in that photo. is there anything else left in your bucket list that you would like to do?
So you were zip lining at 90. What else do you want to do?
Oh.
Oh my goodness.
Well, I've done a lot of other things as well over the years. I scuba dived on Cocos Island, which is of an island that belongs to Costa Rica, about 200 miles out in the Pacific. And I've done a lot of other things as well. I went to Africa in 2002 when I was 80 by myself.
Why wouldn't Mom go with you?
She doesn't like to fly.
And Mom, what's your secret to having a 55-year happy marriage? What's the secret?
Oh.
Because Dad shuts up, basically, is that it?
Well, respect each other.
And love each other enough to forgive each other and to talk things over. I mean, como se dialogar. Ya, ¿verdad? Muy importante.
What year
Paciencia y amor de Dios. Amor de
What year
Dios.
did the volcano at Arenal blow? Is that early 70s?
1968.
Were you there?
No, I had just we had just moved back to the States, so I wasn't there when
Did it affect Monteverde?
But that wasn't Arenal though in '68, was it?
Yeah, yes, Arenal.
It was Arenal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
That's the closest volcano to Monteverde.
Oh, yes, yes.
But it's on the other side of the ridge, and fortunately the winds usually go the other way, so it had really no effect on us.
Okay. It's very, as the crow flies, though, it's like 20 kilometers.
It's nothing.
It's really close. You can hear it. You can hear it from there.
Oh yeah, we hear it when
It killed a lot of people in Arenal.
Yeah.
It did. It took out, basically covered up a town, a little town. Any other questions?
Yeah, are there more Rockwells in Alabama that you are related to?
Yes, there's still Rockwells in Fairhope, Alabama. One of my nephews grew up in Costa Rica, married a Costa Rican girl,
Wow.
and then moved and worked for several years for Rubbermaid, and just retired about 3 years ago, and has moved back to Fairhope, where he was born.
And he's a cousin that during Hurricane Irma,
Yeah,
we went to stay with them in Alabama. Yeah. In Fairhope.
So I wanted to go back to your military experience and then what the government did to you in imprisoning you, which is that, in your opinion, what sparked your interest in leaving the States because of their way of punishing you for?
Yes.
And you had been in the military? I didn't get the.
I had been in the U.S. Army in the Second World War.
Okay.
And had an honorable discharge from the Army when I went to prison for non-registration.
So you were already out?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you didn't register again?
I refused to register for the 1948 draft.
And that act of putting you in prison for that just changed your whole affect towards the country, right? Towards the government? Enough to leave.
Yeah.
If I can answer a little bit, there were two things going on. Obviously, when your government sends you to prison, you think twice, right? The other piece of it was that they felt just as being taxpayers, that they were supporting what was becoming a highly militarized government. And so they felt that, even if they just stayed here and weren't necessarily affected by it, they were still contributing to it in some way or shape.
Yeah.
And it wasn't everybody. It was a big debate, right? It wasn't like everybody in Fairhope, every Quaker in Fairhope decided to leave. It wasn't like that. They had a big conversation about it, and ultimately some people left and some people stayed.
And the Quakers are no longer the majority of Monteverde?
Well, no, no. We were never a majority. When we first moved and called our community Monteverde, there was probably about 500 Costa Ricans living in the area. So we were just a small group in the area.
But they were on the land, the 3,000 acres?
Some of them. And some of them were a land adjoining or close by.
And what happened to the squatters? They left when you came?
They were paid for their development of the land, and some bought land and stayed as neighbors. Some moved further away.
Okay.
And,
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
well, thank you all very much. I enjoy giving these talks.
How many have you given of these?
I've given probably about 1,300 talks like this.
You got it down.
About 1,000.
About 1,000.
And then it got easy.
When is the movie? When is the movie coming?
Good job, Buzz.
Good job. That was fun. Thank you, Stuart.
Oh, yeah.